Let me introduce myself. My name is Ethan, and I hold a prestigious position in a respected engineering firm. I recently celebrated my 31st birthday and am happily married to a wonderful woman named Kaylee. Our marital bliss has lasted for 7 years, during which we were blessed with the birth of our beloved daughter who has a disability. I prefer to call her the second love of my life. Interestingly, Kaylee and I crossed paths when she was recovering from her first and only relationship. She had dated a man for 2 years, but unfortunately, he betrayed her trust by cheating on her. Kaylee, like me, adhered to conservative values in the relationship and decided to wait for marriage. Devastated by her ex-boyfriend's infidelity, she made the courageous decision to break off their relationship. A mutual friend introduced us at a joint picnic shortly after I graduated from college. I had no idea it was a setup organized by our friends. Knowing about her past, I decided not to rush things and refrained from making immediate attempts to get closer. Although I was not innocent, I also had no experience in such matters. It took about 6 months from the day we met before we finally agreed to take the next step. 2 weeks after our engagement, we found ourselves lying in bed after a night of drinking. Kaylee's desire often heightened when she drank alcohol. One night, under the influence, she climbed on top of me and expressed her willingness. Fortunately, I had already prepared by buying contraceptives for the upcoming stormy night, or at least I convinced her of this. Until the wedding, our intimate moments were pleasant, although they could be considered ordinary compared to others. The decision to start a family was mutual after the birth of our child, Izzy. I thought our marriage was perfect. My professional activity was flourishing, and Kaylee was happy with life as a mother and a part-time teacher. But like many other good things, this was not destined to last long. I could never have imagined that my seemingly perfect wife would betray me. Kaylee had always maintained friendly relationships with other men, but had never shown any signs of flirting or similar behavior. I found out that the path to Kaylee's betrayal began at a neighbor's New Year's party. The children were in one house under the supervision of teenage nannies, and the adults were having fun in another house. There were about 20 couples at the party, and the alcohol flowed freely. The company decorated the room with mistletoe, which led to playful and friendly kisses between friends. When the clock struck midnight, among the crowd next to us were our close friends, Joe and Jennifer. Joe and Jennifer have a daughter, Mary, the same age as our daughter, Izzy. Jennifer works as a doctor, and Joe combines contract work with caring for their daughter. Our girls often played together, and either Joe or my wife accompanied them to various events. After Kaylee and I exchanged a midnight kiss, the celebration continued for several more hours. At that time, I lost sight of Kaylee for a moment. When we finally got home, Kaylee looked unusually passionate, which I attributed to the effects of alcohol. Unbeknownst to me, Joe used the children's bedroom during New Year's gatherings and passionately kissed Kaylee, which reminded them of their teenage years. I didn't know yet that this was the beginning of their romance, the start of their secret relationship, and ultimately the betrayal of my seemingly ideal wife. Later, Kaylee admitted that their intimate relationship began only on St. Patrick's Day. Before that, she had engaged in artificial sexual intercourse with Joe several times, but it was while working together to create jewelry for a St. Patrick's Day party that they crossed a new boundary. Looking back, unfortunately, I did not pay attention to a number of signs that should have warned me about the maturing deception. Kaylee became increasingly cautious about communicating with Joe, keeping their time together a secret. Despite the fact that Izzy no longer wanted to play with Mary, Kaylee insisted that they continue to spend time together. I couldn't help but notice Kaylee's declining interest in our intimate moments together. Although there were other signs, I preferred to ignore them, not wanting to admit the truth. I convinced myself that she had started exercising and dieting again solely to improve her physical condition for our relationship. I didn't pay attention to the increase in the number of text messages, which often came at untimely times. When I asked about them, she calmly brushed off my claims, dismissing them as conversations with girlfriends. I didn't know that by this point, Kaylee and Joe's romance had been going on for about 3 months, although I had suspicions. But it was during the night when she refused to be intimate in a state of alcoholic intoxication that my doubts finally flared up. We were at a reception at my place of work, and Kaylee consumed a significant amount of alcohol. It's known that Kaylee's libido increases when she drinks, and that night she didn't want anything. I tried to explain it somehow with fatigue, desperately clinging to the hope that my wife was not cheating on me. But deep down, I knew that there could be no other explanation. Thinking about how much time Kaylee spent with Joe, I couldn't shake my growing suspicions. The next morning, I mustered the courage to confront her, suggesting we make love. The expression on her face instantly confirmed my worst fears. She turned pale, and although she tried to blame it on the alcohol, her shaky words and the panic in her eyes betrayed her deceit. I felt compelled to check her phone and email, and unsurprisingly, her phone was password protected. We had always known each other's passwords, but when I tried using what I thought was hers, it didn't work. This failure brought back all the signs I had been ignoring, like the decrease in intimacy. Although I often attributed it to my busy work schedule, I now saw it differently. I stumbled upon a website suggesting that frequent washing of sheets could indicate hidden activities. While it wasn't our underwear, I noticed that the guest room sheets were being washed unusually often. Normally, we did laundry on Sundays, putting everything in the basket together, but this time I saw the guest bed sheets being cleaned separately. There was a faint but unmistakable smell clinging to them. Reluctantly, I started piecing together more evidence of my wife's infidelity. Naturally, my thoughts turned to Joe as the prime suspect. They spent a lot of time together, and sometimes she even called his name. As the neighborhood Memorial Day party approached, the tension grew. Joe and his family were coming to the annual pool opening. I tried to brush off my suspicions, deciding to keep a close eye on any signs of infidelity. The holiday started with children playing happily and everyone enjoying themselves. Despite the festive atmosphere, I couldn't shake my anxiety. My eyes kept drifting towards Kaylee and Joe, trying to stay discreet. Maybe it was all in my head, but there was a constant exchange of glances between them, checking if Jennifer and I were watching. Twice, Kaylee hurriedly left, claiming she needed to use the restroom, and Joe followed shortly after. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow them quietly. The third time, I watched Joe head towards the pantry after leaving the bathroom. I approached and positioned myself by the door, unnoticed. Through the vents, I heard faint moans, then Joe's voice, expressing impatience and desire. The rustling grew louder, and I heard my wife's voice, confirming my worst fears. She mentioned I was watching her and that it was impossible to get intimate there. Thus, Kaylee's words cut through me like a knife. Numb from shock, I walked away like a zombie. I found Jennifer among the guests, who immediately sensed something was wrong and asked about my well-being. I told her I wasn't feeling well and decided to go home, asking her to inform Kaylee. Overwhelmed by emotions when I got home, I lay on the couch, consumed by self-pity for an hour. Despair turned to anger. Though lost and unsure of what to do, I craved revenge and concrete evidence. I resolved to find out where their intimate encounters took place. Hours later, Kaylee returned home, worried about me. Reflecting on their lengthy absence, I wondered how many times they had sneaked off together. Revenge burned within me. Being an engineer, I had connections with smart tech people. I knew smartphones could reveal locations if not turned off. A friend told me that accessing GPS data through a telecom operator was easy. With his help, we retrieved the data. Surprisingly, nothing seemed suspicious. Joe and Jennifer did visit our house, but not as often as I expected. It dawned on me that most of their encounters likely happened in our home, giving me an advantage. My goal was to catch them in the act with concrete evidence. My friend suggested a program that could hack my wife's phone, reflecting her messages directly to mine. When I doubted I could access her phone, he assured me it wasn't necessary. I just needed to send her an email with the embedded program. The technician quickly set up my phone, and with a simple press of the send button, it was done. All text messages sent by her would be instantly available without any delay. I sent the message, determined to record their actions on the spot. To my surprise, the technician laughed at my concerns, assuring me it was a simple task. You already have a security system with external cameras installed, right? We can easily add wireless cameras that record both video and sound, allowing you to monitor from anywhere. We can even retrieve the recordings later. According to my calculations, the installation process will take about an hour. The perfect moment had arrived. On Wednesday, Izzy and Mary were supposed to go to dance camp, and Kaylee was to take Izzy there. I suspected she would use this time to cheat on me, so I devised a plan to install the cameras while Izzy was dropped off at camp. This would give the technician enough time to set everything up discreetly. On my way home, I stopped by an electronics store to buy the recommended cameras. While waiting in line, I received a notification on my phone. Kaylee had opened my email and installed the app. To avoid suspicion, I immediately turned off the sound on my phone so Kaylee wouldn't know I had access to her messages in real time. Meanwhile, Izzy was excited about the dance camp, fluttering around joyfully. Trying to hide my emotions, I attempted to look happy, but my facade was crumbling. As soon as Izzy fell asleep, I quietly retreated to my office, giving Kaylee the chance to correspond with Joe. My intuition was correct. They engaged in a lengthy discussion, and Kaylee shamelessly shared intimate photos with him. I expected to see an impressive physique, but to my surprise, Joe was as ordinary as me. He was eager to talk about taking the girls to dance camp and then coming to our house for an intimate time. Joe was excited about spending the whole day with my wife. Kaylee shared with Joe her plan to arrive at the dance camp early to avoid long registration queues, eager to meet Joe by the scheduled check-in time. The technician and I calculated that we would have just enough time to install the cameras. We met at a nearby McDonald's where I parked my car. We waited patiently for Kaylee and Izzy to leave. My task was to install 6 cameras while the technician handled the programming. The most challenging part was programming the cameras to activate by movement and be controlled remotely. Strategically, I placed them in various locations around the house: the kitchen, living room, basement, our bedroom, and 2 in the guest bedroom, where I suspected most of their encounters would occur. We finished the installation just in time. Glancing at my phone, I saw 2 cars pulling up to the house, recording the arrival of Kaylee and Joe. But I didn't dare check the phone for traces of their activities. I realized I would have to wait until I got home. Maintaining self-control was crucial for the plan's success. Despite my desire for revenge, I tried to suppress my emotions and refrained from sarcastic questions about her day. Watching her panicked expression gave me satisfaction, but I knew I had to restrain myself for my revenge to work. The next day at work, I reviewed footage from the outdoor surveillance cameras. I saw Kaylee and Joe arrive and park in the garage. Their passion was evident as soon as they entered the kitchen, embracing and kissing. They quickly moved upstairs to the guest bedroom. Despite the muffled sound, it was clear they were taking off their clothes. I decided to skip their kisses, focusing on gathering evidence. While watching, I received SMS messages in which they boasted about their pleasure. Kaylee even mentioned my strange behavior to Joe, who dismissed it, oblivious to my knowledge. Unable to continue watching, I realized I had enough evidence, but wanted to improve the sound quality. Early the next morning, I tweaked the cameras in the guest room. The next day, I watched as their cars arrived on schedule. They went into the bedroom, unaware they were being watched. From a secluded study, I observed their activities, and the audio was clear. But I noticed my sarcastic behavior raised Kaylee's suspicions. "I have a feeling he knows something," Kaylee said. "Despite his suspicions, he has no concrete evidence. He works like my wife. It's funny how they don't realize we indulge in pleasures while they work," Joe grinned. "Isn't it amazing their efforts finance our antics?" I had seen enough. Our relationship had reached a breaking point. I made the difficult decision to consult with a lawyer about ending our marriage. Despite my anger towards Kaylee, I understood that the consequences of this decision would be very hard for Izzy. A friend recommended me a good lawyer. Without hesitation, I contacted him to arrange a meeting. On the same day, I presented several video proofs to the lawyer as supporting materials about Kaylee's betrayal and text messages. He grinned. "We have the opportunity to ruin her," the lawyer told me, explaining that the principle of no guilt applies in our state, but advised me to keep the videos secret. He was sure that she would agree to any terms we offered, expressing a desire to achieve the best possible result. I informed him of my intentions. The lawyer offered to involve Jennifer in our scheme, believing that the simultaneous appeal to both persons would have a greater effect. He provided me with the contact information of one of his colleagues who could represent Jennifer's interests. Deciding to act, I called Jennifer's office and got to her secretary. I left a message for Dr. Miller, asking her to contact me as soon as possible. Less than 10 minutes later, the phone rang, and Jen was on the other end. "What happened? Is everything all right?" she asked anxiously. I said that physically everything was fine, but stressed that we needed to talk. I could tell by her tone that she guessed what was going to be discussed. Jen asked me to meet her at the office at 5 o'clock as soon as the last patient was admitted. When I entered the office, she quickly closed the door and spoke first. "That sneaky man is cheating on me again, right?" she exclaimed, surprised. I asked, "How did you find out about this?" Jen replied, "I may be busy with work, but I'm not stupid. I began to suspect that he spends too much time with your wife. He brazenly believed that he was being smart. Please tell me you have some proof," Jen pleaded. In response, I took out my phone and posted several short videos on which our spouses are engaged in their intimate affairs. "He's finished. That vile man is finished," she growled. "The way you said it, I see that this is not his first betrayal," I said. Jen took a deep breath and replied, "The first, the second, or even the third. After the last time, I explicitly warned him that it was over. This is the end." My lawyer prepared a comprehensive agreement which stipulated that in case of repeated infidelity, he waives any rights to our common property, said Jen. "It looks like you won't need the lawyer recommended to me," I said, and Jen smiled in agreement. "No, but I will ask my lawyer to contact yours so that we can synchronize our actions," she replied. I told her about all the evidence I had collected, including text messages and video recordings. Jen was especially delighted with how I managed to access Kaylee's phone and record conversations. Despite the pain it would inevitably cause, she suggested collecting another week or two of evidence before taking any action. Jennifer correctly assumed that I was seeking a divorce, given that I had already turned to a lawyer. We exchanged phone numbers, and I gave her the contact information of my lawyer. As soon as I got into the car, Jennifer wasted no time calling me. She had already contacted her lawyer, who estimated a 2-week period to develop an adequate strategy and eliminate Joe. It looked like they needed a weekend off to recover from the hard work during the week. Judging by their text messages, Kaylee expressed a desire to take a break for the weekend so as not to arouse my suspicions. They planned to resume their activities on Monday. On Sunday evening, Jennifer sent me a message saying that she needed to talk to me. I couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety, fearing that there might be some problem or that she was having doubts about our plan. I closed the door to my office and dialed her number. Jennifer assured me that our plan is still in force, but she wanted to emphasize that it is necessary to maintain self-control. Curiously, she specifically advised me not to enter into an intimate relationship with my wife in any case. In addition, she made it clear that kissing is also prohibited. However, this was not a problem for me since I was completely unhappy with her presence. After the conversation ended, I noticed that Joe had sent Kaylee his photos with more explicit content. He seemed delighted that the girls had gone to dance camp, imagining a whole week of gaming entertainment. To my surprise, after reviewing the pictures sent by him, I was furious. I assumed that he had an impressive physique, which she would find difficult to resist, but it turned out that he was quite medium-sized. Their daily routine consisted of giving the girls a lift and then returning to our house for entertainment. It became increasingly difficult for me to observe their daily entertainment. Jennifer asked for a lunch meeting on Friday to discuss the plan. She had already consulted with her lawyer, and all the necessary preparations were to be completed by the end of next week. Her lawyer communicated with mine, ensuring that both sides would meet at the same time. Divorce papers will be prepared for them, which they will have to sign, as well as an ultimatum that failure to comply with the requirements will lead to the publication of videos containing accusations. Jennifer repeated her warning that I should not have an intimate relationship with Kaylee. I reassured her that such a reminder was unnecessary since I did not intend to do it. I had no desire to touch her. Curiosity made me wonder why, and she replied that it would be too important to signal for Kaylee over the weekend. Kaylee slept until noon on Saturday, saying she wasn't feeling well, and her appearance certainly reflected that. In addition, text messages were exchanged between Joe and Kaylee, indicating that Joe was also feeling unwell. Sunday evening came, and Kaylee informed Joe that she intended to rest on Monday, suggesting that they meet on Tuesday or Wednesday instead. On Wednesday, while at work, I quietly connected to the surveillance cameras on my phone. As expected, Joe arrived right on schedule. Kaylee mentioned that despite feeling unwell, she still wanted to have an intimate relationship, so I heard. Doubts began to creep into my head. I was not sure that I could continue implementing this plan. On Thursday morning, Kaylee said she was feeling a little better but was experiencing discomfort when walking. From my office, I carefully watched their interaction. When Joe drove up to the house, Kaylee intercepted him in the kitchen. "We can't sleep tonight," she said. Surprisingly, Joe didn't argue. Kaylee continued to talk about her physical pain and inability to make love. Perplexed, she admitted that she did not understand what was happening to her body. They talked for a long time until Kaylee accused Joe of transmitting a venereal disease. Joe reacted defensively and quickly left. I immediately contacted Jennifer to inform her about their illness, but she showed neither surprise nor concern. We continued to clarify our plans for a meeting with the spouses on Friday. The children had their last dance lesson, which ended with a small performance since their grandparents were present at the class. We agreed that the children would spend the weekend with them, a common thing that would not arouse suspicion from either Kaylee or Joe. Jennifer told me that she contacted the authorities and asked them to be present on the street when she ran into Joe. Based on past experience, she was afraid that Joe might show aggression when presented with evidence. On Friday morning, I went to work, although a little later than planned because of the dance performance. My parents expressed concern about Kaylee's appearance, which led to a lengthy conversation lasting more than half an hour. Unlike them, Jennifer and Joe quickly left the venue. I quickly got behind the wheel, choosing a shortcut that allowed me to arrive home a few minutes before Kaylee. In a hurry, I prepared a speech, making sure that the suitcases were displayed in a prominent place. Just as Kaylee arrived home, I received a message from Jennifer informing me that she had already met Joe. Her fears about his tendency to aggression materialized, as a result of which he inflicted physical injury on her. Fortunately, the police were nearby and managed to intervene before serious harm was done. Joe was taken into custody. Jennifer got a few bruises and cuts, but nothing serious. Just as I finished reading Jennifer's last message, Kaylee walked into the room, completely unaware of the impending storm that was about to engulf her. Seeing the suitcases, she asked, "What are these suitcases? What is it?" I replied, "I'll explain now. Please take a seat in the chair. I want to show you something important." I pressed the play button, turning on the TV screen. A screenshot of the text conversation appeared. Kaylee abruptly stood up, exclaiming, "What is this?" Sensing her confusion, I quickly paused the video. "Please sit down. Now everything will become clear," I shouted, raising my voice. She started to speak, but I quickly raised my hand, gesturing for her to stop. I pressed the play button again, and a view of our guest bedroom appeared on the screen. Kaylee and Joe were inside the room. As I noticed, Kaylee was in shock and covered her mouth with her hand. It was obvious that they did not notice that their actions were being recorded. While we were busy with our own affairs, tears were streaming down Kaylee's face. She begged me to stop. I put the TV on pause, wanting to find out what my beloved wife confesses. Tears were streaming down her cheeks as she apologized, admitting that it was a mistake that happened only once. "Please believe me." "It doesn't matter to me," Kaylee calmly asserted, but I couldn't be fooled. "Don't deceive me." "It will only worsen the situation," I replied. Kaylee got up from her seat again, accusing me of hacking her phone and emphasizing its illegality. She took out her phone, ready to act. I ordered her to sit down and be silent. If she had intentions to contact her lover or send him a message, I advised her not to worry. Jennifer has already presented him with irrefutable evidence that we have collected. He lost control of himself and attacked Jennifer, which led to his current imprisonment. Maybe you don't know, but you weren't his first, second, or even third affair. He's lost everything. And by the way, so have you, I said. Kaylee had tears flowing as she begged for forgiveness, expressing her deep remorse. She repeatedly asked what she could do to redeem herself. Well, I began, pointing to the suitcases she had asked about earlier. This is for you. I collected some of your clothes and things. You have to leave. I don't care where you go. I picked up the pack that the lawyer had prepared. This is a divorce agreement that you have to sign, I explained. You will receive 30% of our property, with the exception of the house. In addition, you will have reasonable rights to visit your daughter and will not be required to pay alimony. A supervised visit, of course, will be necessary, I said. Kaylee's reaction was instantaneous and outraged. Who do you think you are? She exclaimed. And why on earth should I sign such an agreement? She answered firmly. I replied decisively, listing the reasons. Firstly, I am the husband of a lying person who has been having an affair with our despicable neighbor for the last 6 months. Secondly, if you refuse to sign the contract, then we will be subjected to a trial during which your incriminating footage with Joe will be shown to the whole world. And finally, I would really not want these videos to become public. Kaylee switched to our daughter Izzy, tearfully asking about her reaction. I do not know, I answered bluntly. How would you explain to her that her mother was unfaithful? Kaylee shrank into a ball, absorbed in her sorrowful sobs. Eventually, Kaylee managed to pull herself together, and she began to read the papers. I refuse to sign it, she said. I just shrugged my shoulders, agreeing with her decision. Switching my attention to another part of the video, I asked Kaylee a question. Who would you rather I send the first video to, your parents or the director? Kaylee protested, warning me that I would face consequences for distributing such explicit content. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Oh, Kaylee, you have no idea who you're married to, or rather, who you're going to officially divorce, I said. I'm an engineer. The video will be sent from an unknown account. Kaylee continued to argue for a few more minutes until I threatened to press the send button. In the end, exhausted by the constant pressure, she reluctantly agreed. Kaylee asked for permission to take some personal belongings, and after a moment's thought, I allowed her to do so. 5 minutes later, she left in her car. The divorce agreement was signed, and we broke up on Sunday. A car drove up to the entrance. It was Kaylee's father, Mr. Anderson. He burst into the house full of anger, accusing me of forcibly expelling his daughter and promising that he would not tolerate it. He stated that Kaylee informed him about the fabricated divorce agreement and insists that it be declared invalid. In response, I sternly told him to shut up and invited him into the house. Kaylee didn't tell her father the true story. When I told him about her infidelity, he threatened me with physical violence to silence him. I showed him an incriminating video. He was instantly silent. At first, he tried to reject the video, considering it fake, but I convinced him that I had many hours of recordings if he wanted to watch them. As soon as he became convinced that I had a huge amount of evidence against his beloved daughter, his behavior changed. As a result, he agreed that my proposal aimed at preventing the publicity of the videos was fair and reasonable. I thought he was more concerned about the shame that would befall him than his daughter. His only request was that he and his wife continue to participate in Izzy's life. I agreed to this condition. After completing the necessary documents, I allowed Kaylee's father to pick up the remaining things. After spending several months in prison, Joe disappeared. Breaking the news to Izzy turned out to be the most difficult task I have ever faced. She was still too young to understand her mother's actions. I told her that Mom and Dad are no longer together. I didn't think she was guilty, but she seemed to have deeply internalized the idea that her mother was to blame for everything. Izzy hasn't seen her mother in 6 months. At first, my parents assured me that she could not communicate with Kaylee, but later I found out that Kaylee was hospitalized due to the discovery of an incurable venereal disease, an STD. Medical workers managed to cope with the symptoms of the rash, but it was very contagious and could not be treated. Kaylee was informed that sexual activity was impossible for her until a cure was found. Upon learning of the diagnosis, I immediately took action and appealed to the court with a request to limit Kaylee's physical contact with her daughter. The court granted my request to change the visiting regime. 6 months passed, and Kaylee's mother turned to me with a bitter approach. "I hope you're happy," she said. "Kaylee is no longer with us. It's all your fault." I answered firmly, "No, Mrs. Anderson, I'm not happy. I've never been happy since the day I found out that your daughter was cheating on me." It was incredibly difficult and heartbreaking to tell my daughter that her mother's actions led to her death. I certainly wasn't happy when I had to explain to her that her mother had contracted a disease that precludes any physical contact between them. Therefore, Mrs. Anderson, I can assure you that I am far from thrilled that I will have to tell my daughter the horrifying news that her mother's choice led to such a tragic outcome. I refuse to take the blame for your daughter's profound lack of moral principles, Mrs. Anderson. I ask you to refrain from further conversation, I said firmly. After Kaylee's funeral, I didn't see Jennifer again. She and Mary moved to another place. Before they left, I plucked up the courage and asked if she knew about the venereal disease that Joe and Kaylee had contracted. She met my gaze directly and replied, "It's better for you not to ask this question." As I understand it, Jennifer is involved in Joe's illness, which infected Kaylee. That's why Jennifer has so often told me not to have an intimate relationship with Kaylee. Story 2. Are you ready? Then let's start. My husband and I have lived together for 9 years, and 2 of them were married. Before meeting my husband, I had a previous relationship in Essex. In general, we had a full and joyful relationship, except for one aspect, our intimate life. My husband constantly had a lower desire for intimacy than I did. If I was ready to engage in intimate life several times a day, then he tended to frequency once a week. In addition, he preferred to spend intimate moments in the dark at night with the lights off about 90% of the time. I often experienced a feeling of dissatisfaction as if something was missing. To compensate for this, I took matters into my own hands up to 3 times a day. Nevertheless, my husband remained my closest and dearest person, and we were surprisingly similar in almost all aspects of our lives, except for physical intimacy. We were soulmates in many ways, but in this respect, our relationship diverged. Despite this, our emotional connection was so strong and the compatibility was so undeniable that I couldn't help but fall in love with him from the first moment we met. Both my husband and I suffered from depression and attention deficit, and interestingly, during our student years, we studied in the same field. Our shared values further strengthened our bond. Unfortunately, we faced offensive statements from others who could not understand our connection and often believed that we did not belong to each other, only by external signs. These remarks had a deep emotional impact on him, and I felt his discomfort. However, I found my husband undeniably attractive, a stunning, strong, broad-shouldered man with an amazing beard. I regularly expressed my admiration for his appearance. Over the years, I have repeatedly tried to discuss my physical needs with my husband, approaching this topic with love and compassion, trying to consider all points of view. It was important for me to respect his wishes as much as I wanted mine to be respected. I understood that he didn't have to participate in intimate life if he didn't want to, but I often faced difficulties when it came to initiating physical intimacy with him in any form. Whenever I tried to take the initiative in the form of touching or caressing, he reacted with disgust, waving me off. His actions, although within his rights, deeply hurt my feelings. Whenever I expressed my dissatisfaction, it often caused him to hate himself. It seemed that he was trying his best to please me or even to have a meaningful conversation about our intimate desires. These attempts at loving communication sometimes led to the fact that I felt rejected by him to such an extent that I no longer wanted intimacy with him in any form. The most effective approach to solving our intimate problems was that I directly stated my desire to enter into intimacy with him. He would confirm my request, saying he would think about it, and sometimes, after a day or 2, he would start physical contact, usually in the middle of the night. This brings me to another question that has been bothering me. I found that I had a strong desire or crush on a significant number of our mutual male friends, including those with whom we had known for several years. It is important to note that I never acted on these obsessive thoughts and remained faithful to my husband. They constantly tormented my thoughts. I was not going to terminate the marriage. I just wanted to communicate with our friends by mutual consent because of the strong physical dissatisfaction that I experienced in their presence. I found that I had a strong attraction to some of our single male friends, even if they were not conventionally as physically attractive as my husband. These people showed care and attention towards us, which caused me to fantasize about kissing on the neck or intimate actions at social parties. I must admit that these fantasies confused me very much. I perfectly understood the unhealthy nature of my desires, but nevertheless, I felt compelled to realize them. At times, I could not shake the feeling that I had spent all my bright feminine energy on a partner who could not fully appreciate it. There were times when I wanted to become intimate with my closest friends while preserving our friendship. I touched on this topic with my husband to some extent, but he avoided a serious conversation, offering only promises to strengthen our intimate life. Unfortunately, these promises have not been fulfilled. Interestingly, the more delicately I discussed this topic with my husband, the less he sought intimacy with me. If I had just been going through this struggle alone without feeling any feelings for my husband or our close friends, then perhaps everything would have been easier. The internal conflict arose because despite the strong desire to remain faithful, my body seemed to crave something more. It was as if the deep love for these men that I felt as friends had turned into an unwanted longing, and I didn't know what to do next. I wasn't going to break the connection with them because our lives were very closely intertwined, and I just couldn't accept this thought. My affection for him was deep, but one Sunday evening when friends came to us, our mutual acquaintance turned out to be next to me. I can't recall every detail, but at some point, our legs found their way under the table, our thighs brushing against each other. The rush of feelings made me yearn for solitude, away from any prying eyes. Despite the undeniable attraction to our mutual friend, I resolved to remain faithful to my husband, not wanting to betray his trust. Even though he persistently sent me flirtatious messages, I always responded with polite detachment. Deep down, I harbored a strong desire to experience his closeness, yet felt bound by my commitment to my husband. Frustration built up, and my thoughts were consumed by the night. In my mind, I envisioned an alternate reality where couples could explore physical connections with their spouse's consent, perhaps within an open relationship. One evening, lying in bed, I mustered the courage to have an honest conversation with my husband about our current intimate life and boldly expressed my desires. Starting the conversation was certainly challenging, but I knew it was essential for the health of our relationship. Determined, I broached the delicate topic of open relationships, explaining that my intentions were not about seeking emotional connections elsewhere, but rather fulfilling physical desires with his knowledge and consent. Initially, my husband was taken aback and reacted defensively. He struggled to understand why my satisfaction couldn't be found solely with him. The thought of sharing me with others was difficult for him to process, which was understandable. He wrestled with the idea, questioning whether this meant my love for him was diminishing. It was clear he felt hurt and insecure, fearing he might not be enough to meet my needs. Over the next few weeks, we had numerous heartfelt conversations, delving into the complexities of an open relationship, carefully weighing both the potential benefits and challenges. After considering all possibilities, he ultimately expressed his reluctance, citing the potential imbalance and the likelihood that I would have more success than him. During our discussions, I proposed a solution to alleviate his concerns. I suggested that I could arrange for women to join us as well. This offer introduced a whole new realm of emotions and complications for us. We embarked on the difficult path of setting clear boundaries and anticipating possible issues. While my husband was still hesitant, I began formulating a plan to convince him. I knew one of his fantasies involved being with two women, so I turned to the internet to find like-minded individuals interested in engaging with a couple. After several attempts, I eventually found a woman who seemed perfect for our situation. Hoping to surprise my husband, I meticulously planned our first night together without revealing my intentions. One evening, when he came home and took a shower, I led him to the bedroom where an unexpected surprise awaited him. The woman I had invited and I were lying in bed, eagerly anticipating his arrival. At first, he was nervous, unsure of what to expect, but we took our time to create a comfortable and relaxed atmosphere. What transpired that night turned out to be an incredibly enjoyable experience for all of us. It rekindled our connection and brought a sense of fun and joy into our lives. My husband also embraced the experience, finding pleasure and satisfaction in it. After the woman's departure, my husband reflected on the importance of my happiness and realized that completely suppressing my desires could lead to resentment and strain in our relationship. Gradually, he began to accept the concept of an open relationship. It was a gradual process, not an immediate change. Initially, we explored encounters where my husband engaged with other women. Over time, this strengthened our bond, allowing him to reach a point where he could calmly accept my involvement with another man. By the time my husband gave his consent for me to date other men, we had already accumulated diverse experiences in intimacy. During our conversations, he made it clear that he preferred not to know any details about my partners. When the time came for me to explore relationships with other men, we set boundaries, including the mandatory use of protection, and agreed that either of us could terminate the arrangement at any time. Our agreement focused strictly on physical connections, not emotional attachments. Additionally, my husband insisted that we not get involved with any of our personal acquaintances. Although I felt some discomfort about this restriction, I chose not to express my concern, hoping he would eventually reconsider his stance. Soon after, I succumbed to temptation and entered into a physical relationship with a mutual friend with whom I had long harbored feelings. Our flirtatious correspondence, which began that fateful evening when our legs touched under the table, laid the foundation for this new connection. Since he was single, I discreetly visited him after work and then returned home to my husband. At that moment, I realized my husband preferred to keep our open relationship private and decided not to inform our mutual friend about it. I had a secret affair with our mutual friend, unbeknownst to my husband. Our friend assumed I was cheating on my husband, which concerned him about the state of my marriage. However, I believed it was better for my husband to remain unaware, since revealing the truth would likely lead to his frustration and self-doubt. To avoid any undesirable consequences, I took precautions and used protection to prevent an unwanted pregnancy. Surprisingly, my husband kept his promise, and during the entire month of our open relationship, he never inquired about my extramarital affairs. I found myself drawn to another mutual friend and started considering a potential intimate relationship with him. Initially, I sent him a flirtatious message, sparking our communication. Since he was newly dating someone, we switched to a more discreet messaging platform, Snapchat. Eventually, we met in person and repeatedly entered into intimacy. During our open marriage, I had relationships with 3 different men, and this new connection brought me a satisfaction I hadn't felt in our marriage. At a party we attended, I found myself with 2 people, a mutual friend and someone I met online. To my surprise, my husband brought up the topic and directly asked if I was romantically involved with our mutual friend. Believing honesty was the best approach, I confessed and confirmed his suspicions. Unfortunately, my husband was hurt by this revelation and wanted to end our open relationship. After he calmed down, we had a rational discussion, addressing his concerns. I promised to end the relationship with the mutual friend. It became obvious to my husband that there was a certain connection between me and this friend, and he felt an underlying dynamic. To resolve this, my husband asked me to send a text message in his presence, officially ending the relationship with our mutual friend. Realizing the impact on him, I ended the relationship with not only the friend he knew about, but also another mutual friend he was unaware of. Understanding how much this situation hurt my husband, I wanted to ease his pain by severing all ties. As our open relationship progressed, I noticed my husband growing closer to a woman I had introduced him to. This began to bother me as he spent more and more time with her. They often corresponded, took walks together, and she even invited him to family events. Feeling uneasy, I decided to talk to him about it. I expressed my concerns, emphasizing that our agreement was purely physical, yet he seemed to have an emotional connection with her. I still remember the haunting moment when my husband revealed the news that shattered our world. It was a night like any other. We were lying in bed with shadows dancing on our faces when he dropped a bombshell that left me paralyzed with shock. He admitted that during our open relationship, he had impregnated another woman who intended to keep the baby. As his words sank in, I struggled to comprehend how this situation had developed. The question of how this could happen echoed in my mind. Our arrangement was to maintain physical connections while avoiding emotional attachments, and we had stressed the importance of using protection to safeguard our meetings and preserve our communications integrity. But this incident shattered the illusion of control I had clung to. The rules we had set were broken, and I felt deeply betrayed. This unforeseen turn of events was never part of our plan. Waves of panic and anger overwhelmed me, mixed with a bewildering array of emotions. The gravity of his actions and their impact on our relationship were too immense. With a heart heavy with pain, I found the strength to confront him. My voice trembled with resentment. At that moment, driven by desperation to salvage what remained of our love, I issued an ultimatum. I pleaded with him to ask her to terminate the pregnancy, hoping he would grasp the seriousness of the situation. My request was born out of a deep fear of losing the love and life we had painstakingly built together. To my horror, my husband made a choice, and it wasn't in favor of our relationship. He chose her, putting her above me, above us. It felt as though the very foundation of my world had crumbled beneath me. The man I loved and trusted more than anything struck a blow that shattered my heart into countless irreparable pieces. He chose to live with her, leaving me feeling rejected and abandoned. Moreover, he seemed oblivious to the immense pain I was experiencing, intensifying my suffering. It seemed as if the memories we once cherished, the love we once shared, had dissolved for him. I began to doubt whether his love for me had ever been real or if it was just an illusion. Amid the mental anguish, I realized I could not stay in a relationship where my feelings were no longer valued. It was incredibly painful to watch him go to another woman, see their relationship flourish while mine crumbled. I had to find the courage to leave and forge my own path forward. The journey to the end of our marriage was long and painful. He pushed me to the brink, testing my strength and resolve. Over time, I began to explore my own desires, entering into relationships with different partners, just as we had during our open relationship. However, in these encounters, there was not the love and connection that we cherished so much before. Physical intimacy could not fill the void left in me by a broken heart. I longed for the love we lost and yearned for its return. I missed the laughter, the dreams we once shared, and the sense of security that his embrace gave me. But no matter how difficult it is to come to terms with this, I understand that our love was forever spoiled, forever scarred as a result of the decisions we made. Do I regret that I offered my husband an open relationship? I'm not sure. Perhaps I had to break up because he was unable to satisfy my innermost desires and reveal my own essence. In the end, we ended up in the same place, facing the same outcome.